Greetings. In this video, we'll go through videos 1 through 4 in the Jack in the Box playlist, building the box through the crank. In the next video, we'll tackle the deformers, and then finally, in a third video, we'll discuss constraining a temporary head. All right, let's get started. We are working with NURBS to build the box. Create NURBS primitives square, and we're going to scale the square up by 10, and we're going to fillet the edges. Note these are 4 separate curves. If we open this group here, we'd see although they're straight, they're still referred to as curves. One other thing to note is we're going to be modeling Z forward. In other words, this direction is the front of the box, and the positive X, this direction, is where we'll put the crank, and then finally, in the rear Z direction on the back of the box is where we'll have the hinge for the lid. We're going to start by using the fillet tool. We'll come to curve, and note many of the tools here have similar labels, so make sure that you're in the curves when we're working with NURBS curves, and surfaces for NURBS surfaces. That can be confusing. We'll come to curves, and we're going to fillet. We'll open that dialog box, and we want to trim. If we don't have trim on, let me just demonstrate that. It generates a fillet, but it left the original curves. It didn't cut them. So I'm going to hit undo, and I'm going to come to curves, fillet. I'm going to open that dialog box and hit trim. We'll hit fillet, and now it got rid of that excess. So I'm going to grab the next 2 curves. You could use your shift key, or I drew a bounding box there. We don't have to go back to the menu to hit it again. The G key on the keyboard will repeat the last command. Again, I'll draw a bounding box around the next 2 curves, hit the G key to execute that fillet, and we'll come to the final and hit the G key. And so we have the original 4 curves, and then we have 4 new fillets. Again, they're all separate. So our next task is to attach them. I'm going to start here again, Z forward. I'm starting with this curve, the first curve, and shift selecting the first fillet. So if we go in order, we'll be able to maintain and stay on the same page. Here I'm going to open the attach. Again, curves, curves, attach. Surface also has attach, so make sure you're in the curves menu. Come down to attach. I'm going to open this dialog box. And let me just execute it in the default. I'll hit attach. You see that it left the original, and then it also averaged that attachment. And a lot of times that will give you a nice generalized curve. So when you're attaching curves, using the blend method is something that you will want to consider in future projects. But for this particular box, I'm going to come to curves, attach, open that dialog box, and I want connect. Connect will maintain the shape. The blend averaged, and technically it averaged out 3 vertices in each direction. But we want to connect it. We want to maintain these particular shapes, and then keep originals off. We don't need the originals anymore. So I'll hit attach. And then just like before, I can use the shift key to multiple select, or I can drag a bounding box. Hit the G key, G key, G key, G key, G key, and then G key. Now, what's happened here is we had curves going opposite directions. I'm going to hit undo and just demonstrate this. When it comes to curves, there is a direction, and the direction is indicated, a little bit hard to see. There's a little square here. That means the beginning of the curve. And there's a U, which means this is the direction. So this is the start of the curve, and this is the direction of the curve. And then all other vertices on the way out are just the little teeny tiny square. So if we look at this curve and I right click it and use control vertex, you can see that it's going the opposite direction. So it attached as it should, because this curve is going the opposite direction. If your curves ended up working, that's fine, but if this mistake happens, this is how you'll solve it. We'll pick this curve, we'll come up to curves, and we'll just reverse it. And now if we look at it, if I come in, we'll see that the square, the little square is on this side and the U, so the direction is going this way. And if we were to look here, this one is also square, U, and then dots all around. So now they're both facing the same direction, and I'll shift select those both, and I'll go to curves, attach, and we have a seamless closed curve. If you look here, all of your attachments have been counted. Our history is on. Our inputs are all listed here, and it's actually problematic. If I go to try to move it, you see that it doesn't move as a unit. It's maintaining all of that history. Z key to undo. And so what we'll do is just come and say edit, delete by type history. Got rid of all that, and then it cleaned up our outliner as well. We just have one singular curve. So that's building our initial curve for the box. We're going to come up and open the duplicate special. Whenever you're using the duplicate special, it's a good idea to hit reset. I can see here I had a negative from a previous project, and you may forget or not see something in there, a decimal, etc. So we'll, out of good habit, hit reset settings. And then we're going to translate 8 units on the Y. And this is the boundary of our box. Now we'll eventually loft this, but we're just going to continue with the top of the box here. And there's a tool when you're working with curves called offset. Let's see. Down here, offset, curve, offset. I'm going to open that, and I'm going to reset it. And let's just hit, we'll just execute it. Now it offset in the opposite direction that we wanted, so we know that we'll have to put a negative. It did it 1 unit, that's a little bit more than we want, so we'll change that as well. I'm going to hit undo. And you might think, what's the difference between using offset and just scaling? Well, in this case, because we have a square item, the offset would behave very similarly to if we had just scaled it out. But anytime you have a non-proportionate rectangle or a odd-shaped curve, and you want to uniformly offset it along the entire course or length of the curve, the offset is a good is the means to do that. So I'm just demonstrating that here, curve offset. We're going to say, if I were to say -1, right, we'd get it going in the opposite direction. That's a little bit too much. I'll undo that, and third time's the charm. We'll say offset, and we'll put in a -0.3. So that just gives us a little ridge here. I'm going to come up and say modify center pivot, get that pivot in the middle, and then we're going to duplicate. Now, just a standard duplicate, you could hit Command D. I'll raise that up, and we're just eyeballing it here. You could be precise with your numbers. And then Command D, scaling this one in. So this is the border of where the jack will come out of the box. And then finally, for our duplicates, we'll pull this one down. So we have our curve network. NURBs are great using very precise curves to generate shapes. We'll come and we'll begin lofting. We're just going to loft these 2 curves here initially, surface, loft. That generates the shape, and with our surfaces, we know that black is the inside and the gray is the outer surface. So we're just going to reverse that. Because this is the inside of the box, this is technically the outside of the box, so we want to see that gray on the outside. Now, if I go to select this, I might, because I'm lofting curves, if I go to select this, I might get the surface. So this is a good time to come to layouts, 2 panes side by side. We'll make it the same window, perspective, And then in this view, I'm going to hide everything except my curves. And in this view, I'll hide everything except my surfaces. And this will make lofting go by quickly. So surface loft, it's wrong direction, we'll reverse it. I'll shift select the next two, surface loft, reverse the direction. And then the final two curves will loft and we'll also reverse those directions. So what we have here, right, are four shapes. There's the initial NURBS, second, third, and fourth. And so just as we were able to attach curves, we can also attach NURB surfaces. The trick to attaching NURB surfaces is that they have to have the same number of spans and they have to have the same direction. So we looked at the curve and we realized the little square and the U needed to be going the same direction. That's also the case with surfaces. And we'll take a look. This last attachment oftentimes is going in the opposite direction. But let's pick the first two. So this is our first lofted surface and our second. And we'll come up to surfaces this time. Attach. Again, be cognizant of, are you curves attached? Are you attaching curves? Or are we attaching surfaces? I'm going to open this. And in this case, I don't want the hard edge. So we're going to leave it at blend. And I don't want the original, so make sure that that's off. And we'll hit attach. Come around, shift select the next one. And I could just hit the G key, right? Because that was the last tool that I used. The G key executes the last tool. And then for the final one, this is oftentimes where there's a problem. I'll hit the G key, and it attached in the opposite direction on that final lofted surface. So we can come over here into our inputs, open attach surface 3, that's the one that we just executed, 1, 2, and now this was our third. And we don't want the reverse on the second. So we'll turn that off, and you see that it now attached in the proper direction. I'm going to undo that and all the way back to before we make the attachment. So this surface is going this direction, this surface is going this direction, and it's giving us an odd attachment. You can override surface directions. This is a little bit tricky to execute just because you have to hold the shift key and drag. I'm going to right click and choose isoparm, and I'm going to drag the isoparm. I'm technically not dragging it, I'm trying to select the one on the edge, but because there's two surfaces in the same place, I can't pick both at the same time. I can't draw a bounding box around those two isoparms because they're two separate surfaces. So I clicked and dragged. That's the isoparm on the edge of this surface. Now I'm going to shift click the other surface that I want to attach to. Right click isoparm. With my shift key, I'm going to drag that one up. So I've selected the isoparm of this surface on the edge, the isoparm of the second surface on the edge, and now regardless of what I have in my attach, regardless of the direction of the two surfaces, when I go to attach, I've overridden it. I've said by pulling those isoparms together, I've said to the computer, this is where the attachment should take place regardless of direction. So those are two techniques you can use. Anytime you're attaching NURB surfaces and one flips, you can reverse a direction in the channel box, or you can right-click the isoparms from both the shapes, drag them together, and you're overriding the direction, the local direction of each of those surfaces. All right, I'm going to come back and bring everything back on, and we're going to pull up, in fact, I'm going to turn surfaces off here, and the next thing we're going to do is create the hole for our jack-in-the-box box. I'll come and say create NURBS circle. I'm going to actually look in the top view, so I want to scale this up. I don't want to go beyond, right, that interior portion of the box. We're bringing it right here, right, giving a little bit of space between the circle and this curve here. I want to snap it to this curve. In fact, if the other curves are in your way, you can pick these two and we can hide those. Display, hide selections. Oh, sorry. Display, hide unselected. So now we've just got these two and we won't inadvertently snap to another curve. And then here's our, right, when we're snapping, and we're going to talk about this throughout the semester because snapping can be tricky. Here I'm snapping in all directions. So if I hold down the C key and I snap, you see that it snapped the circle to the curve in the on all three axes. I'm going to hit undo and undo, get that into the middle. If I pick the Y arrow, if I select that and make it yellow highlighted, that means that I'll only snap. I won't snap on the X and I won't snap on the Z. So now if I hold down the C key and my middle mouse button, you see that it snapped only in that direction. I'm going to do that again. C key, right? This means that I'm snapping in any or all directions. If I were to do it now, I snap that way. That's not what we want. We want it centered. So I'll undo that. I'm going to click the Y arrow. This limits me to snapping on that direction. C key, middle mouse button. And you can look at that arrow. It's showing you that we're only snapping on that axis direction. The Z and the X are not affected, just the Y. And we've matched it to this curve here. I'm going to say show NURB surfaces, and we're going to loft these. We'll come to surfaces loft, and this is, again, an issue of direction. So our circle and this outer curve are going opposite directions. I'll pick my circle, and we'll just rotate that 180 on the rotate Y. And that straightens it out. The direction is the wrong way, so we'll say surfaces reverse. And as long as we're here, I'm going to pick this curve, the circle, we'll duplicate it, slide that down, and then, oops, I accidentally got that surface. You can select here in the outliner. If you want to skip select, right, if I hold down the Shift key, I select everything in between. But if I want to skip select, I can hold down the Command key, and that allows me to skip something in the outliner if I'm making multiple selections and I want to skip. So I've got these two circles selected, and we'll say surfaces loft. Again, we need to reverse that direction. And let's look at everything. We'll come to display, show all, and we've got the top of our box. Now again, we've got a lot of history involved, and we don't need these curves anymore. I'm going to, I think in the movie I might have done this right off the bat, but just to keep that out of my way, I skipped that section. So I am going to now loft this. We've got the entire box, with the exception of the top. And this is the curve that I need for that. If I were to delete curves now, my surface would deform. We need those curves because the history is intact to maintain the surface. But I'm just going to come to Edit, Delete All by Type, History. So we've gotten rid of the relationship between the curves and the surfaces. Let me actually demonstrate that. What I mean by that is if I move this, right, our history is intact. If I come here and we scale this, right, our history for those curves and those surfaces is intact. But if I come up and say Edit, Delete All by Type, History, the relationship now between the curves and the surfaces is gone. And this will allow me to delete the curves. I want to delete all the curves with the exception of this one. I'm going to hide my surfaces so you can get a better look at which curve I'm talking about. That top, and we'll use this as the basis to develop the actual box top. I have the one I want to keep selected, and I'm going to make an inverse selection by holding down the Shift key and drawing a big bounding box around everything. So you see that inverted my selection. Let me do that again. I've got the thing, in this case, a curve that I want to keep. I'll hold down the Shift key, and I'll draw a big bounding box around everything, holding down the Shift key, and it inverts the selection, and now I can hit delete. Because our history was gone, our box is maintained, right? We use those curve networks to generate the surface. Once we're done and we like what we have, we can delete the history, then delete the curves. That cleans everything up. We can see very clearly what we have in our outliner and this last curve here. A little bit of housekeeping. I'm going to grab all those. In the video, I think I do this earlier on in the process. But it's never too late to create a layer. A layer just allows you to keep things easy to select. We could right click and say select all the objects in the layer. That makes it convenient. In this case, I just want to hit the V to make that invisible. Now don't forget there's also T for template, and this is the one that really trips up students. The R for reference, because it looks like it's on, and then you go to pick it. You can see up here surfaces is available, so you haven't masked that off. But anytime you're trying to make a selection and it's not selecting, make sure that R for reference isn't on, right? And I can select that. But I wanted to just make that invisible. We're going to duplicate this. You can hit Command D, or I'll come the long way, edit duplicate, and we'll slide that second duplicate down. And this is a kind of unique tool to the NURBS workflow, which is the planer. I can execute that, and it gives us a shape within that closed curve network. So anytime you want a flat surface, you can draw out a nice curve, a very detailed curve, and very quickly generate a surface. It's not a true surface, and we'll talk about this in our continuing NURBS skill development. A planar is really kind of a quick and dirty temporary way just to have a flat surface. This will not deform very well. Applying textures becomes difficult. And the reason is it's actually, if we come and look at the control vertex, it is actually the square. This closed curve functions really as a boundary, and it allows Maya to generate a transparency here. So this actually is a square. That fillet edge allows Maya to view this as invisible. So it is truly this surface here. That may be more than you need to know for this exercise, but the takeaway is a planar surface is just kind of a quick and dirty way to give yourself a flat surface within a closed curve network. Deforming it becomes problem, texturing it becomes problem. But for our purposes here, just having a flat box top, it works well. I'm going to come to this one and we'll execute that again. Planar. Because the box is going to open and this will be the interior face that we see, we want to reverse that. And then now I want to loft between these two curves. If you want to skip select, again, Command key, I've selected those two curves. We could have hidden surfaces, so it made it easier to select. But I've just skipped selected here with the Command key, and we'll say loft. We need to reverse that. And we have our box top. I'm going to delete all my history, and then this will allow me to delete also those curves. All right, we have our shape. And then we're going to create, now note, I'm kind of dollying around here. Look at your axis direction, right? We want to make sure that Z is forward. So if I was to create my cylinder here as a hinge, and I wasn't aware of which direction I was sitting in, I might put the hinge in the wrong place. And that causes some problems really in this lesson down the line when we go to constrain the head to the joint. We want it to constrain forward and not have the head flip left, right, or up, down. So I'm going to just dolly around, putting Z forward again so I know that the cylinder comes back here. I'll say create NURBS primitive cylinder. I think I'm going to undo that and I'm going to reset it. Create NURBS cylinder. Maybe the default doesn't have that on. I want caps on both. So I want a capped cylinder. So I'll turn both on for caps. I'll hit create. I mentioned that in the tutorial video, I think I give you the actual numbers. Here I'll just set this up manually. I'm going to hold the J key, which allows me to snap incrementally, 15 degrees at a time. I could have just typed in 90 here on the rotate Z, but the J key allows you to just snap incrementally, and I can snap around there and get a 90 degree very quickly. Scale that down and scale that out. And we're just kind of eyeballing this here. We're going to pull that up and then pull it back and make sure that it's in the negative Z side. This is a point in the Jack in the Box lecture when we talk about detail or fidelity. If I was going to have a close-up on the box or a close-up on this hinge, I'd probably want to do a little bit better job modeling that cylinder, maybe put in some additional details. But we're originally thinking that the box is going to be viewed from about here, and that's going to open and the viewer is not really going to see that cylinder. Of course, if your storyboard or story called for a close-up of that, you'd probably want to model that with a little bit more detail. Now, to make this box top function, we're going to grab the three elements here, the two tops and the side, and I'm going to shift select the cylinder. So when we're parenting, the last thing selected will be the parent. And I'm going to say edit parent. And what that means is now I can just pick the cylinder and we're rotating the cylinder and that box top follows. There is one thing in the video tutorials that I would probably do differently if I was doing those tutorials again, and that is having you turn on the handle and slide that off. When we slide the handle off, later on we're going to create a deformer, and the deformer will come all the way out to the distance that we slid the new selection handle. Let me generate that and clarify a bit. So I am going to say display, transform display selection handles. That turns on the handle for the cylinder, and that just makes it easy for me to pick, especially if there's lots in the scene. And then we'll move it out. Typically you don't want any handles within the surface. You want to make it real easy for the animator to see what they should be selecting and animating. We come into component mode. Way out here is handles. I'll turn off verts so they're not in my way. And then we'll slide that handle out and then come back into object mode. So here we have this handle that represents the top, and that's good rigging to have that handle out to the side. But later, when we go to create an overall deformer, the deformer is going to come all the way out to this handle, and so we'll need to push this handle back. So in those videos, I think I pulled this handle out a little prematurely. You can pull it out and leave it out, or you can just skip that part of the video, and we'll do it after the deformers are created. Right, I can move that back very simply, come to component mode, make sure handles are on. I can just slide that back. And there is that handle. If I wanted to turn it off, I could select it and come to display, transform display, selection handles, and now that's off. All right, let's bring back the box. We might want to have this on a separate layer, so I'll say box top layer. We'll bring those, and I'm going to rotate this up 90 degrees. So again, I can hold the J key and just get that coming straight up. So there is our box. Final video, I believe it's number 4, is generating the handle. So let's tackle that. I'm going to actually template these both so that I can see them. I'm going to come into the front view, right? We're looking straight down the Z, which means it's front. And we're going to create an extrusion. I'm going to grab my CV curve tool. I'm going to zoom in here, and I'm going to say grid, 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 and grid. Now, yours doesn't have to look exactly like that, but we do want the first two vertices to be in line. And that means that our extruded shape, our extruded curve, I should say, will follow that uniformly. So just make sure that your first two verts, and we talked earlier in this lesson about following, so here's our little square, and here's our U, and our profile curve will follow this path exactly. We're going to create a circle, and we're going to make it 6 sections and linear. What that gives us is this hexagonal shape, right? So it can look a little more machined. I'll hold down the J key again and rotate this up onto its side. You could type in 90 here. I'm going to scale it down a little bit. We don't want it to be that large. And remember that your profile and path has selection order. So we want to pick the profile, shift select the path, and we'll say surfaces extrude. And that follows. Now we can come back to the, that's the path. We can come to the profile, and we can make that thinner or larger. And that looks pretty good. I'm going to come back to this front view. I'm going to just create a basic sphere. I'm going to hold down the J key, rotate that back. We'll scale that a little bit. Actually, pull it down a hair, and we'll hold down the J key. Now, we're going to do this version, oops, not the J key, excuse me, the X key. I want to grid snap that. And you could pull that out a little bit. That doesn't have to be super precise. Your first Jack-in-the-Box is going to look almost exactly like the one that we're producing here that's produced in the videos. For the midterm and then for the final, we're going to create a second and third version. So don't worry if you want to have a custom box and make your handle and do that custom hinge that I was talking about, maybe put some graphics on the box, or just do something really out of the ordinary. You'll have that opportunity at the midterm version of the Jack-in-the-Box, and then you'll certainly have that opportunity for the final. We'll be doing a version of this project 3 times this semester. This is the kind of warm-up to introduce you to the tools, and it also allows us to kind of problem solve if we're all working on the exact same version. With this selected, I'm going to shift select the extrusion and then just hit lowercase p. And so this now functions as a unit. I can delete that curve, and I'm going to hold down the X key and just put that about there. Now that looks a little large. I can scale, right? It's scaling from there, and if you wanted to, kind of change this a little bit, that would be fine. If you want to change that crank. We'll leave it there, and that is it. There is our Jack-in-the-Box box. If you have questions, right, the first thing to do is ask them in the technical discussion forum. If I'm unable to answer your question in text, you can send me your file. Make sure that you come up and you'll just go ahead and delete all your history, but as a general rule, you want to delete all by type non-deformer history, save it as an ASCII file. You can email that to me via the Canvas shell, and then I'll make a quick video solving your problem if I'm not able to answer your question in text. All right, have a good day.